Cloud9, as this video is being recorded, finding themselves in one of the worst slumps of their entire time as a five-man lineup. Not even close to the top of LCS at the moment. Looking like, with how many games in this shortened season, like perhaps this is the first season where they won't even make the final. I thought let's kind of talk about the best and appreciate and kind of celebrate the majesty of what Cloud9 has represented when it's at its best, and the style that they've made famous, and the way they've been able to change over the years and remain relevant and remain a top level team, and actually be that outlier that they've been within the Western scene, where when you talk about shot calling and you talk about having the right pieces, they were really, in general, the only team in the West that had this really great shot calling, and despite sometimes not having the mechanical players to always compete with the elite level Asians, had this style that meant that they could be exciting and they could come back into games and they could figure out a way to attack and a way to make their pieces be relevant in a game where other teams from the West, if in their region their players were good enough, they could have a style that they think would work internationally. Then when the players were just a level above and the teams were a level above and the strategy was a level above, they'd just crumble, they'd get stomped, they'd get rolled over, and it just looked like, oh, what hope can there be for these teams? With Cloud9, there was always hope, at least for an entertaining game, a competitive game, a game that'd have something in it interesting, even if they were playing some of the best teams in the world. That's what made Cloud9 well, not only, if not the greatest North American team, one of the greatest North American teams, one of the greatest Western teams, certainly one of the most entertaining Western teams and League of Legends teams, period, to watch in the history of the game. I've always enjoyed watching them from the beginning. So let's kind of talk about that. And so let's go through their careers and see how things shifted and this style developed. So before they had Cloud9 with this five-man lineup, some of these players played in different teams. So High and Lamination were back playing in Orbit back in 2012. Balls was playing in MTW North America. Who else was there? Sneaky was like a no-namer even in early 2013, just playing in like lower level teams around the time of the LCS qualifier. All of them failed to get in the LCS qualifier. Meteos was just an absolute no-namer who was just playing thousands of normal games on high ping with friends and hadn't really tried to be a competitive player. Those guys, Lamination and High, when they were back in Orbit, their only real result of note was they once finished top 4 MLG Summer, which is like August 2012 sort of era. They had a 4th place there. That was famously the one where there was collusion between Curse and Dignitas, which ended up getting them sort of banned out, and then Team Dynamic and Orbit got a load of the prize money instead. So cheers to Scara and Saint for donating that money there. That was only really their big result of note. I know Balls, when he was in MTW, they had like a top 4 at like an IPL San Francisco. It was around similar month. I think it was August as well, actually. Coming into 2013, they'd all failed the LCS qualifier. They make this lineup. They bring in Meteos, this unknown jungler, and immediately you can tell it's going to work well. High's moved up to... Well, I mean, High had been a jungler at different points in time, but High had been a jungler at one point in time. He's the mid laner now. They've lost Nian Tonso, who was the mid laner. They've lost Wild Turtle, who was the AD carry. And at this point in time, they've got... Oh, Sneaky, that's right. They bring in Sneaky because they offered Chaos the spot. Chaos turned it down. They bring in Sneaky instead. When they put this lineup together, they'd already been doing well in the amateur scene, really well. Now they just dominate the amateur scene. And now when they come to the LCS qualifier, the promotions, they smash it completely. They wreck complexity. And actually, Meteos doesn't even die in this whole series. And they get into LCS in incredible fashion. You can already see at this point in time, the rotations are super quick, on point, knowing what to do, knowing instantly the reaction to make, having this beast jungler just can't be killed and rampages the whole map. High looks really solid. They're already coming in with all these high hopes. We've heard all these rumors of like the 90% win rate versus top level teams, TSM, Dignitas. They come into LCS, same thing. The train just keeps rolling. They're starting to stomp everyone. Losing is rare. Losing only comes when teams do really crazy stuff, like CLG get an insane win. Vulcan have some insane team fighting versus them. Overall, they're just stomping everyone. At the time, in this season, which they go on to win, they go 25-3 in the regular season. They don't lose a single game in the playoffs, beating TSM in the final. High is playing really well. Crucially, the mid lane talent at the time wasn't particularly great. If we think of the mid laners back then, okay, ManCloud was the best mid laner. He was the star of Vulcan. Then who did you have? Reginald was still around, but this was the back end of his career. He had a very figured out style, and overall, his team was part of the strength. Bringing Wild Turtle was part of the strength. He himself wasn't a great player at this point in time. You had Link, who was still kind of struggling to become a real carry in CLG. It was one of their problems. You still had, let me think. You still had NY Jackie over in Curse, so he was just an average, middling sort of player, not a superstar. Still had Skara and Dignitas, who's really starting to fall off at this point in time. Mid-lane talent wasn't very good. Bot-High was one of the better ones. He was top 2, top 3, and he was having effective games within their system. It was all working really well. The star of the team, obviously, was Meteos. This guy was unreal. He would just farm up all game long. Here's the thing, it's not that he only farmed and you never saw him on the map. He'd farm up, but he'd only come and gank somehow when it was a really high percentage gank. A mixture of because of his lanes, presumably giving really good communication, High having some good shot calls, and he got to shot call some of the objectives, did Meteos, the Dragon, the Baron. And so this synergy between them meant that when he would come, it would be like a 90% chance he'd get the kill on the ganks. It wasn't wasted time. Then he'd go back to the farming, to be farming all game long. And he'd emerge in the team fight as like a third carry within the team, as like another carry within the team. They'd be team fighting with this unkillable tank who was so tanky on his Zac, his Nasus, and then he'd be doing damage because he'd be like an item up on the other jungler. And so this whole style was incredible. And I remember that what I would vividly remember was, first of all, by the time they got to the mid game, because of the ganks and because of him farming, he'd already be really strong and they'd be able to team fight really well already. But at this point in the game, not only would he be super tanky, but their shot calling on when to take the fights and him being able to engage in on something like Zac meant he could engage in, draw all the focus, while High, while Balls, while Sneaky could just focus fire other people within the team and just kill the other team's carries, and he would just take up all the attention in that sense. They were even great in this season at doing these dives where a fight would start and the other team would think, right, we'll back off to the tower, right, they can't really fight us now. But they were so good at team fighting and knowing when to fight and having Meteos be super tanky that they could just full engage under the tower, ignore the tower, which is doing tower hits and aggro to them all the time, win the team fight and get out in time to have enough people alive that it'd been a one team fight. They were amazing at getting free dragons, not contesting the dragon and win the team fight, but they got into situations where they would just position correctly with vision control to take a dragon totally for free when the other team didn't know, or take it where they just made the other team back off for fear of taking a bad fight, or in the times when they had to fight, then they would seemingly win like 80 to 85% of these fights. So add all that together, they were getting all the dragons. They were really good at knowing snap decision of like, say someone starts to kill this tower, don't just go and defend it. They would take another tower and they'd realize like, if we take this tower, we push it really hard now, the other team will back off and think, right, objective for objective, but we can push on to the next one and we can force a fight there, or we can force them to come get us and then we fight under their tower. Their shot calling was beautiful at this point in time. Admittedly, NA had some real problems with shot calling. There wasn't much coaching going on. They were still playing like standard lanes, etc. But the shot calling was great in this team. Beyond other members of the team they had Balls, who was he was this crazy rumble, but in general he wasn't like this carry that he would become the next year. He was just a good top laner, very solid. The way the game was going, he was never going to get his head bashed in lane. He was never going to do badly. He just had to do fine and it would be going well. At that time, he was more of a looper type, just do this and come into the team fight type top laner. The bot lane, interestingly, the bot lane would be really effective, even though on paper that should have been the weak point, because Sneaky was this fucking nobody playing in a league with people like Doublelift and Wild Turtle. Lemonation, yeah, he had some good solo queue success, but that's about it. He wasn't some beast player. He clearly isn't a beast in terms of mechanics. But this bot lane, what made both of them really good is that since they're both in theory weaker players, they've both figured out the limits of what they can do and they play within that, and then together they play within it, and then they synergize together because Lemonation's really smart and Sneaky seems like he knows how to be efficient. Added together, that made them way more than the sum of their parts, and they were this really cool bot lane. They weren't dominant, they weren't smashing lane, they weren't doing great, but then they'd pick these champions. They were the ones who pioneered that Ashe Zyra combo that they'd take every time it was available, because Sneaky was amazing at landing those Ashe arrows to start a team fight or in a team fight to just paralyze a guy with some CC. Lemonation, he's using the CC of Zyra. He's using that to keep people off the Sneaky's Ashe in lane, so they can go safe. They can play safe in lane. If chances there for a kill, they can go in on it, and Meteos is going to come in as the third guy. That would be where the majority of the kills bot lane would come from. As Meteos would come in as this big tank, and they'd use the CC, they'd get it onto someone, Meteos would come in, and either they'd just kill someone, or they'd have like a fight, and maybe it'd go like 3 for 2 or 2 for 1 for them, and that's how they'd get ahead in this particular sense. And then once it got to the fight, in general, they didn't give a whole lot. They never gave them. They kind of sacrificed some of the gold of the bot lane, if you look at the graphs, for Meteos, for him to have this super farm style, because he would tax the lanes, he would come in, etc. And it didn't matter though, because these were useful champions, and these were the utility of what they were going to use them for in a team fight meant that they didn't have to be super farm, they didn't have to smash them, they didn't have to be ahead on items, because they were going to have utility. And then you'd have High going super ham all in while shot calling. Then you'd have Meteos unkillable, going all around, drawing all this attention, just like this unkillable tank and doing some damage. Then you'd have Balls landing that rumble ult right across everyone. And this is one of the key things back then, is that part of the reason their champion pools never got exposed, and why Meteos could play Nasus and Zac in like 1 billion games, and why they could play Ashe Zyra every time, and why Balls could get Rumble, and why High could get whatever he wanted to play mid, is because in general they had this really unique approach to pick ban, where instead of looking either for power picks from Korea and seeing like, well, who can sort of play that? Okay, well, that's really powerful, so try and play that and try and play it against this particular matchup that everyone knows right now is a counter pick. In general, they never did that. What they did is they had champions they liked, which were comfort champions and which synergized well, like the Ashe Zyra bot lane, and obviously Meteos on Zac. They would pick these whenever they were available, even if people were trying to counterpick them or picking things that were strong against it, because their mentality was sort of like this. We're going to try and win pick ban phase in terms of getting the champions we want, and then whatever you want, we're just going to have to deal with it. That's our approach. We're going to deal with it. First of all, we've got champions we like, so we're going to be good on those. And then, because we've got tools that we know how to work with and work well with and work efficiently with and work our best with, we're then going to solve the problem of whatever you have. So whatever you have, if this guy gets out of control and he gets ahead in his lane, he's got this really powerful power pick, then we're going to have to create a fight where we focus the right guy and Meteos is able to tank up some of the damage from your guy and we're able to get our guys in and fight properly, or we're going to take enough free objectives and dragons and towers that we're going to make the gold league come back in our favour. And they got, whatever it was, they could always kind of set the puzzle out within the game as it's going on of what is going on, what are the strengths of them, what are they going to try and do, what are we going to aim to try and do, what are favourable situations for us, and then they'd set about creating them. And if they got behind, they'd reset and they'd go, right, now we have to create some situations now where either we can take a big gamble to get back in a game, or we can grind our way in by winning a small skirmish here and then getting into a favourable one there, taking a tower here, and suddenly we're back in a game after losing a big team fight at say 18 minutes. They were really good problem solvers as a team, and in terms of High and his shot calling, and Meteos with the objective control shot calling, and Lemonation with his pick ban phase of knowing what they're going to pick and in what order, therefore how to get our champions that we want. And they were really good at this in this particular season, and they went undefeated. Now then they went into international competition. We all remember it went decently, but not really well. For the team that had been so dominant in NA, they weren't some world beater on the world level. Unfortunately, the level of disparity between them and NA closed right up as a gap, and they were actually slightly behind the top European and international teams. And so they played Fnatic in the Worlds, and they got ultra stomped in that game 3, and they just couldn't do anything. And unfortunately, Meteos' style got kind of exposed for what the worst case scenario for it was, where he was farming all game, but he couldn't do anything. He was so far behind himself, so far they could never create a fight they wanted. And then these champions, obviously Expecchio and Kassadin, were just going so ham and so snowballed ahead that even their great detective skills, and there was no clue to find here to solve this game. It was out of control. Better opponents, more skilled opponents, another great team in terms of synergy and knowing their style, facing you and you're too far behind and everything's gone wrong, and your weaknesses have been exposed in a way no one had managed to in NA. And this was their problem. It looked like maybe that's the ceiling for them. Maybe they can't get past that. They went to IEM Cologne. Again, they tried this approach of letting the power picks get through for the opponents, but we'll take what we want and we'll work with it. And what happened at IEM Cologne? They faced Gambit. Alex Ich, you remember they'd let Expecchio get on a Kassadin, one of his signatures that he went ham and wrecked them on. Now they let Alex Ich on the Kha'Zix. He's going ham wrecking them. Diamond Prox, who, let's face it, is the opposite of Meteos. He's not going to farm up all game. He's not going to be there. He's going to counter jungle all the time. And if nothing else, just take away creeps from Meteos so he can't get as farmed. He's going to try and find Meteos and fight him. And him and Darien are going to do that. Him and Alex Ich are going to do that. He's going to try and come in on high. This style, this pressure, this low econ gank heavy style that Dan Prox was using in synergy with his team was the counter to Meteos' style. And unfortunately, they got exposed in this tournament as well. And again, another European team with similar scenarios of letting through the power picks and them getting stomped by it, wrecked them. Now, Battle of the Atlantic, yeah, it was an exhibition tournament, but okay, they had a really good performance here. Fnatic looked like shit, but whatever. Cloud9 took advantage of all that. They beat them up. Finally, they had a win. Next year, LCS Spring arrives. Now, the key thing here wasn't what happened to Cloud9. They were still the same team. But Bjergsen's come to TSM, and that's clearly changed it, and TSM's rolling early, and it's looking initially like Cloud9 lose to TSM. Maybe this will be the season they have problems. But what's key here is they were able to overall get back into dominant form again, where they finished 24-4. They'd only lost one extra game from the season before, amazingly almost replicating the same thing. And in the playoffs, they did replicate it. They went undefeated and they beat TSM 3-0 in the final. Incredible stuff. Now, how were they able to do it? Because it wasn't the same way. First of all, mid lane talent's been upgraded in NA at this point in time. Overall, teams have upgraded players. They've got a lot of the old school players are disappearing from the lineups at this point in time. Overall, what allowed them to do this was they changed up some of the priorities in the team. So now, Hai can't be such a carry in the sense that he was. He was almost like the second carry or the main carry, or the second carry after Meteos, like a hybrid carry. He was able to do that in LCS Summer. In LCS Spring, now the talent's more there, he can't really do that to the same degree. And so what happens now is Meteos switches up his style. He becomes this low econ gank pressure style player. He's trying a lot more ganks. And crucially, he's targeting to get ganks going early. So what he would always do at this period of time was he would always gank Balls lane early to get Balls ahead, 1 kill, 2 kills, and get the first tower really early, like 5 minutes in. That they'd already have started up with this initial lead. And so then they wouldn't have to worry about being as good at team fighting in the mid game when it was even or they were slightly behind, because they'd have the initial lead and they've taken some chances that before they were more reactive in that sense. And because Balls would be ahead, this is it. They switched it so that now Balls was being sort of the main carry aside from Meteos. Now this is it. Balls' era to carry and be a great top laner and be really, really strong player at this point in time. Sneaky elimination, a little bit less effective because they can't just pick Ash's Ire every time, but they're just being solid still. Hai's dropped off a bit and he's sometimes getting exposed, but in NA it's enough still. And it's mainly the play overall of Meteos here that's working well. And crucially, they're able to play totally different champions. Meteos switches up his champion pool to play them in this particular era. They're playing different champions overall at different positions. Elimination's doing a good job of... they're still able to, in general, keep that approach of picking the things we want and then dealing with whatever the opponents have. It works again. They win the season again. During this period, they went to IEM Katowice. Their problem here was they did well early on, but then they had to face Fnatic in a best of 3, and it was actually similar to before. They'd have their times when it would work out, but overall, Fnatic had a little bit too much for them. Fnatic had upgraded and got reckless. Overall, again, the problem was the Cloud9 style in general was when things were even or they were only slightly behind, they were good enough at team fighting and creating a team fight and getting into a skirmish that they would know that they could win it a lot of the time. They could focus down. But the problem was some of the Fnatic players had too much skill and would be on champions that were too strong. And Fnatic loved to get those mid-game skirmishes and fight you in the jungle and attack here and be aggressive and go all in and pile onto people. So it was kind of like a bit of a nightmare matchup because the things that Cloud9 wanted to do to the enemy and draw them into engagements, Fnatic actively wanted to do. It's like challenging someone to a fight where you kind of want them to back off because they're afraid of you, but then they're just like, come on! And then they're just like some fucking drunk sailor who's going to go ham on you, you know. You don't want to fight that kind of battle suddenly. You want to fight the guy where if he does fight you, it's not a good situation for him, and otherwise he's like, maybe I'll just back off and let you have that free dragon. That's not what was going to happen when Fnatic were there. Fnatic would fight them in those lower river dragon fights, you know, and turn back on them, and turn the fight when they tried to get out of it. That's the problems they were having internationally. Same at All-Stars. All-Stars was interesting because on one hand, they were impressive. They managed to beat OMG in the group stage, they managed to beat Fnatic. But they didn't have Hai, and Hai was the main shot caller. But somehow, even the players around it, they weren't quite as good at shot calling, but they adapted around it, and they were able to, by using Link, who did a good Hai impression, by the way, and actually did better because he had pretty solid laning at this point in time. They were able to make it work still to be competitive, and this kind of showed like the spirit of the team and the approach they had. Whereas instead of just mentally being defeated, like, well, we haven't got Hai, he's our main shot caller, and he's been one of our key carries for the last 2 seasons. Instead, they were like, you know what? It's a problem. This is the pieces we have. Here's what we have to work with. We've only got a couple of weeks. We've got this player who isn't normally a player that we use. We're going to have to use him differently. But again, it's a problem to solve. And is there a solution here? Is there something we can do? It doesn't have to be the perfect solution. It just has to be good enough to be something we can do in this scenario. That's what they were able to do. You go beyond that, LCS Summer, the last split that they were in. Interestingly, they start out and it's going really badly. Balls is looking pretty off overall. He's still like the carry player, but he's almost the only carry at this point in time. It's looking really badly. Meteos' champion pool looks a bit iffy. Now, even though he's using the newer champions, etc., the jungle talent at the time had really equalized in NA. There was a lot of people at and around his level. Like, Crumbs was doing really well early on. I Will Dominate came on stronger as the season went on. Amazing. At times could have really good games on Lee Sin, for example. Meteos' advantage didn't seem as good. he wasn't the beast he was before. He was just a top player, but he no longer had like a big disparity between him and the other junglers back there. Dexter for CLG was doing well. You had this one of their strengths taken away. High's getting way more exposed because now there's even better mid laners. Like even Shifter, for example, is on a better team. He's on Dignitas now. Voyboy's getting better as a mid laner. The mid lane talent's really gotten a lot better, stepped up season by season. So now High's actually doing fairly poorly. Admittedly, he'd had the problem where he'd had his lung collapse. He's had to come back from that. But he never quite ever came back as the same player. And he got good again. But I think just in terms of talent level, he'd been eclipsed a bit. And this was a problem for them. Balls wasn't a total monster. Sneaky's just okay, but now you've got strong bot lanes like X-Special's now playing with Cop, making him a lot better. Lost Boy comes over to play with TSM in Wild Turtle there. Lost Boy strengthens that bot lane. The CLG bot lane was doing really strong for a while. Again, a lot of their strengths have disappeared here, but they've still got that quality of being good at shot calling, good at playing from behind, good at finding ways to gamble to get back in a game or grind back into a game, good at taking objectives to even up what we're giving up kills, but taking the objectives to make it the gold even, give them a chance later in the game and get that key one fight or that one Baron fight or that turn. They could still do all of this. And so that ability, I actually feel kind of like patched up some of the holes that you saw of those players where we couldn't quite tell at the time that some of these players had dropped off. But they could make up for it in this sense. It reminds me of when Gambit weren't the best team in the world anymore, but they still had that Gambit quality of the great players and that ballsiness and that ability to team fight. And now, instead of using that and smashing teams most of the time, then every now and then having to rely on that to win a few extra games and be the best in the world, now it felt like in those latter days, Gambit were just always relying on that. And either they had to win off a crazy innovative pick, or it had to be this crazy coming from behind and creating this mad fight and battling their way back in and just being men and just balls deep. Now, that's kind of the era that Cloud9 was in now. They were having to battle from behind. They were great from playing from behind. They could get a team like CLG, they could get a team like Curse, and let them have a little lead, but then know that we can exploit the 2 or 3 mistakes they're going to make in the mid-game or during this team fight or taking the wrong objective. Know that we can exploit that. Know that we can out-rotate them. And overall, this let them hang around where what was happening was their record was quite bad. They were like, 5th or 6th or 4th or 5th at some point in time for quite a lot of the season. But they would have they had the best winning record over the top 4, top 5 teams. So you always knew that they had the quality to compete and stay around there. And then towards the end of the split, as teams like Dignitas CLG fell off, now this is where you saw Cloud9 rise up and LMQ fell off a little bit. Cloud9 rose up and they finished the regular split in first place. They did it again. They go into the playoffs. They stomp Curse 3-0. It looks like, wow, it's going to be the same story for the third playoffs. But this time, TSM faces them. TSM has Lost Boy. TSM has much better pick ban. TSM has a much better team overall. They've managed to, over those last 2 weeks, peak just in the right time and get better as the playoff series go on. Narrowly making it through some, but getting through each time. Just having enough in each area to get through. And in the final, same story for TSM, and Cloud9 for the first time is really tested. They're pushed to a game 5, they're losing the big team fights, they're losing the key team fights. TSM's able to take team fights they want. TSM wasn't as good at shot calling, but Cloud9's shot calling itself wasn't quite at that level, and also it wasn't able to be as effective because TSM was getting ahead and they had better mechanical players, and this was when finally Cloud9 lost out. So you go to Worlds now. At Worlds, Cloud9 really had to lean on that ability to play from behind and to solve the puzzles and to make it into a scrappy game where we're going to make it chaotic, where there's 6 factors to what could happen in this fight if you take it or when it's happening, and we're just going to take the risk that when we're all in this chaotic situation, we're going to make the better decisions in the moment and knowing what decision to make next to set up a play than you. And so they were in this difficult group where Najin Whiteshield could have won 2 out of the 3 games. Well, they didn't win 2. They could have won all 3 of the games to a degree. Alliance was able to beat them handedly in 1 game. They were in a dangerous group. But first of all, Alliance did them a favour losing Kaboom. And secondly, Cloud9 were able to get these classic Cloud9 come from behind, ballsy, winning a certain fight, balls literally landing an insane equalizer that turns a whole fight around, High able to do cool things, Mitos playing a decent level. Admittedly, this was one of his worst tournaments ever, just playing an okay level. Sneaky really coming on very strong at this tournament. This is when Sneaky first started to hint that he was going to be the next main carry of the team, since Balls had his issues at times. High's really dropped off. Mitos isn't the great player in terms of level above his opponents in domestically and hasn't become the god tier international jungler that his potential maybe hinted at earlier on in his career. This is when Sneaky starts to carry some of the load for them now, and he's able to carry a bit. And yeah, they managed to win a game of Samsung Bloom. They managed to have some great rotations in another game. And we see some of the hallmarks of Cloud9 still, even as they've changed carries and changed the system of who is the main person and how do we set him up and how do we put him in position. They're able to battle still. It's still the moxie. It's still the balls. It's still the mental game of chess that they're able to stay in there even with people who are better than them. That's what made them entertaining even at this era. Go after that, they have IEM San Jose. At this tournament, on paper, and even in the way the game's played out, there's a part of you could look and say maybe they should have lost to Alliance. Alliance had upgraded with Reckless. They had these beast players at certain positions. You're thinking to yourself, Frogman's going to totally exploit high. Reckless can easily handle Sneaky. Sneaky does well enough. Reckless does well, but not quite enough impact. Froggen has a really bad series. High has a decent series. Balls doesn't play particularly great, but Meteos, he really comes back in terms of importance in the team and how good his level was at that particular time for that one tournament. It's like he was way back at the level of being way ahead of NA junglers that he was at LCS Summer from 2013, but with the low econ style of the spring of 2014, because now he's added Jarvan. This is the new arrow in his quiver or whatever the fuck you call that shit. This is the new weapon he has where suddenly he's really good at it and he's landing these cataclysms on a Froggen to let them quickly delete him and I can just go in and all in on them. And they're catching Shook out. Shook, who had been a really strong mechanical jungler, is getting totally outclassed by Meteos. And now it's Meteos and Balls who really carry them through this tournament. And they win the tournament overall. And now we've seen again, while they've had to go back, the best success from Cloud9 in general always comes when Meteos is effective. They've gone back to him being a main carry type player and main important part of the system. But now they've got a new carry player. After having High, after having Balls, now it's Sneaky's turn to be a carry. And going forward from there, he was the carry player. That's a really interesting quality. Not only are their team great shot calling, great if they get ahead with the league, converting it, getting objectives, free dragons, sneaking dragons, knowing when to fight, mid-game team fighting, late-game team fighting, when we think of the old school, when Meteos would bounce in on Zac and they'd fight under a tower, turning team fights around the dragon. But also they were a team who learned how to battle from behind, learned how to get back in a game from objectives, learned how to get the right fights, the right 2 fights in a row. Even if you're losing 1 or 2 men, it's going to culminate in the right fight where you ace it and then you take the Baron and you win the game. They got this particular talent, but more importantly, they learned how to change the system of Cloud9. The reason they've never had to change players in their lineup is because they've been able to change the player that carried and change it in a sense that was even intuitive, where I don't even know if they actually discussed it within their team, but it made sense in the way that it worked in the game and they were able to get new results rather than just keep going and go, oh, well, Hi, you have to become a carry again, or Balls, have you dropped off now? Well, I guess we're just fucked and we're just going to play it out. No, they were able to shift so that this guy carried the slack and then this guy just has to contribute in some aspect or don't die and they can still win. So yeah, early on, they had that style. They were the get ahead, the win team fights, get all the dragons. Meteos is this monster late game jungle carry. Then they go to the Balls carry era. They have Meteos ganking style all over the place. They get ahead sometimes, but they're good at coming back the other half of the time if they're not, by superior shot calling, having the synergy and confidence to follow in and go up on each stuff. They're not like the CLGU style where they hesitate and then they decide not to do something, and that's what kind of paralyzes them and doesn't allow them to stop getting choked out. They always battle back. The shot calling style, they can instantly react to stuff. They commit to fights in the mid to late game. They're one of the best Western teams ever at fully committing. Not in like a gung-ho like Kangamakaze style of like one guy just like jumps the starting blocks and then they're all like, oh, better follow him in, like CLG curse style from some of those years. This is like, someone's like, we're going in now, but it's the proper shot call. And everyone's like, okay, that's our job. We're going in and we're going to do it in this particular fashion. And they always seem kind of quite calm and composed overall when they would do that, because they had the reliance that we know what we're doing here and we're picking the right fights. And in general, if we lose this one, it's not to worry. It's a puzzle to be figured out. We'll get to the next one and we'll figure out a way to make it work from there. That's the thing. Their commitment to it was also the commitment to this deductive approach of what is that we can do here, this inductive idea of like, is this possible? They were able to solve problems and they were able to shift the system to make things work. Not to shift to like, this is how a Korean plays or this is the best way you could play. Just to get something that works within the tool, looking in the toolkit you've got and go, right, this tool, oh, this one's broken. Well, this one will still work in this sense, and I can do something different with this one. Oh, is the bridge down to this city this way? Well, you know what? There's a road through the mountains that we can go through instead, so switch over to here. That's what was beautiful about watching them. They're one of the most entertaining teams of all time to watch. Definitely amongst Western teams. I think the only team that can really give them the only 2 teams I think can give them a run for their money in terms of most entertaining Western teams of all time is like Prime era M5 and Fnatic, when Fnatic were winning all those LCS and that great pick comp, skirmish style in the jungle. Those are the only two I can think of that can even give them a run for their money. But overall, Cloud9 so cerebral, so intuitive in the way they played, so synergistic. Synergy's thrown around so much around players that don't really deserve it. This is a team that really synergized. And it made players where if you took these individual players and you put them on other teams, other top teams, they wouldn't be half the player and they wouldn't have half the game impact. And some of them wouldn't even be good players and would probably be run out of LCS. But put them together and the way that they fit together, and they became one of the best Western teams of all time. And so I've always loved to watch them play. It's been a joy to do so. I don't know if they'll get back there. I haven't given up quite yet. It's too early. I still feel like something can change, and especially because of that ability to change system, and for players like Meteors to change how they play, players like Sneaky to change up from being more supportive to more carry orientated. I feel like those are really good omens, really good signs when you're looking forwards to can they adapt again for like a fourth time to do something different and get back to the top of NA. I think there's enough still there, and there's enough poor teams and enough of the top teams still have some question marks around them that it could be done. Whether they will or not, it's been a wonderful run to see this lineup play. It's been a joy to watch them. There's been majesty in their play. There's been beauty. You could have a sense of awe in how they were able to again and again. Like, how did they figure out a solution here? How did they find a way to come back when that team's beaten them, but then win them in the next time they play them? And how can they make this pick work versus that power pick? It's just been fun to watch. I love Cloud9.